The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon. This is Jennifer Schaus coming to you live from Washington, D.C. today as we continue in our Webinar Wednesday series. We conduct a webinar every Wednesday through the entire year in 2018, and we cover various topics in government contracting. Our presenters are industry experts, including attorneys, accountants, and other business professionals in government contracting. The full schedule, and we are already booked for the entire year, can be found on our website under the webinar section. And all of the previous webinars have been recorded. You can find those on our YouTube channel or on our website under the archived webinar section. These are all complimentary. And if you do have any questions today, Jason Lee is our speaker, and his contact information will be found on the last slide, including his email address and phone number. So I encourage you to reach out to him directly if you do have questions. A brief blurb about us. We are based in downtown DC and provide professional services for companies, both product and service firms that sell to the government. Services range from market analysis reports, 8A certification, contract administration and compliance, to GSA schedules. Again, our full service list is on our website. We do host events and seminars throughout the year, and again, those are on the website under the events section. So thanks for joining us today. A little bit about Jason Lee, who's going to be talking about proposals to DARPA, IARPA, and BARDA. So Jason's background can be found on this slide. And Jason, thanks for joining us. I'm excited to hear your presentation today. You've got a great background for today's topic, and I will turn the controls over to you.
Well, thanks so much, Jennifer. Welcome back, everybody who has attended a previous webinar on other Wednesdays, and for all the first-timers out there, welcome. I want to take an opportunity before we begin just to express my appreciation to Jennifer. Thanks so much to Jennifer Schaus and Associates for the partnership with my firm, as well as hosting this great webinar series. I hope that all attendees find value in the content, and to contact either Jennifer or myself, which will be on the contact information page at the end of our presentation, with any questions that you have, or if you have any ideas or feedback that you'd like to share. As Jennifer had mentioned, my name is Jason Lee, and I'm the founder and CEO of a firm called Incisive Intelligence Group. We are a management consulting firm that provides professional services in the areas of proposal development, contract compliance review, strategy, and as well as problem solving on individual bid solicitation matters that you might have unique to your firm. We've been specializing in a couple of areas to include the national security intelligence arena, the healthcare arena, IT services, and as well as other professional services that support both government federal practices as well as those in the private sector who are looking for federal business. Well, I would like to start today by talking a little bit at a high level about our topic, and that's acing proposals for the various different basic research organizations that the government has, primarily DARPA, the big one being out of DoD, IARPA, which is very similar to DARPA, and that's the arm underneath the ODNI, or basically the intelligence community. And then finally, BARDA, which is underneath the healthcare wing of the federal government, taking a look at basic research from a medical and drug delivery and device perspective. There are other offices out there as well, to include the Department of Energy, which runs ARPA-E, and they look at energy issues as well, not just from a commercial element of conservative or green energy, but also in the national security arena as well. So there are some overlaps between places like ARPA-E as well as DARPA and IARPA, so forth. Let's begin by taking a look at some of the most critical tips that you'll need when you first try to identify a solicitation that's of interest to you and that you would like to respond to with one of these ARPAs. The most important thing that you'll have to keep in mind is the messaging of your strategy. So the first step is to formulate a strategy about your firm. Do you want to pitch your firm in terms of its technical capabilities, a particular unique specialization within the sciences, Perhaps you have an approach, a technique, or a product that you've already built that's proprietary, that could be already patented, and that you would like to make a new application based upon a hard problem that's been put out by the government in a new and effective way. Once you have this strategy, you want to craft a message, and that message is going to be comprised of basically three parts. The first part is to identify where you think you can uniquely solve a part of that hard problem that's represented in the solicitation. A lot of firms decide that they want to hit up the entire hard problem. You don't need to do this. This is, in basic research, success in a particular leg of the project, the leg of the program, is what is important, and not trying to tackle everything. In fact, when the source selector looks at your response to their solicitation, they will look for realism and what is feasible in terms of your capabilities and what your promises are and whether you can deliver them effectively. And we'll talk a little bit more about work plan issues and scheduling, that kind of thing, later in this presentation, at least a little bit. And if you would like to learn a lot more about work plans and schedulings, you can take a look at a previous webinar that I actually conducted here on the webinar series last year, I believe a couple of months ago. You can find that in the archives, as Jennifer had mentioned. The second leg of your message is you want to articulate who will be working on your team. So not just the biographies of the talent, but actually talking to what do they know? What are the disciplines that they actually offer to the project, and kind of what is their track record that they have in terms of their own innovation. So whether that is, again, patents that they've had individually, advisory roles that they have made to various different organizations that are well known and respected in the community, these are the things that you want to highlight. The third piece to that strategy, to that messaging strategy, is to write succinctly about what you plan to do in terms of the execution of the actual experiment. So what are your metrics? What do you hope to achieve in terms of a deliverable at the end of the project? These kinds of sentences need to be written succinctly in some kind of executive summary early on in your bid solicitation response, in about 2 or 3 sentences for each point. So one point might represent the work plan, the next point might represent the deliverable. Altogether, those 2 to 3 sentences per point will probably add up to about a paragraph or so, maybe about 100 to 150 words of an executive summary. So that's going to be the foundation to your messaging strategy. And once you have that, you're going to be able to move on to the next step, which is identifying the goals of the research. So you have to sit down and take a look at the requirements of the solicitation and figure out what does the government want to achieve with this particular research effort. And then align those to your own goals that you typically have when you conduct these kinds of experiments. The more parity that you can actually communicate back to the government agency about how your goals pretty much line up philosophically and from a values-based position with the government, especially in this particular solicitation, the more successful you'll be. After that, you'll want to put yourself into the shoes of the source selector. So what I mean by that is create a draft of your technical approach, your technical volume. Read it back as if you were going to be a critical eye of funding yourself. So you want to remove all the biases that you have about how great your company is, how great your approach is, and take a look at it. If you were not so close to it, what are the things that you could nitpick out of that? In fact, if you wanted to be as critical as you want, that's probably the best approach to have, so that this way, if you're overcritical, you will probably exceed what the government's critique is going to be within their review. The next phase that you want to focus on is the protection of your proprietary information. And this is always a balance, because you want to provide enough detail to tell the source selector that you've got something of value, a secret sauce, if you will, that no other bidding competitor that you'll be facing will be able to offer. But at the same time, you don't want to give too much away that that will be out there in documentation just floating on out there, especially if you don't win the award. These documents may be archived somewhere, and they may be accidentally shown to a competitor, and you're going to want to protect any risk from that. So the best way to balance it, I would say, is to talk about the capabilities of what your unique offering is. So kind of the practical value that the government will get out of it, the end user, basically what they call the transition partner, that's the end user. But if you're going too much into how that capability is being designed or how you came about discovering it, then you know you've gone a little bit too far into proprietary space. So that's usually the test, the litmus test that I like to use in coming up with messaging your uniqueness without giving away proprietary information. And then finally, I would say you want to be careful in the Q&A phase. So there's always going to be an opportunity before you put in your submission to interact with the COTR or the COR of the agency and ask questions. So my advice would be is to not be shy, especially if the program manager, him or herself, has posted contact information in addition to the COTR or the COR. Go ahead and engage. A lot of bidders feel that if they engage, that they might risk quote unquote buddying up to the government, and that would be a conflict of interest of some kind or inappropriate behavior. No, if the contact information is posted out there or made available to you, take advantage of it. Make a phone call, make an email out to the agency, ask all the questions that you need. Now, you're not going to want to make a laundry list of questions. You want to be very targeted and come up with maybe 5 to 10 that you feel are most important. And then if you have anything else after that, go ahead and tack it on. But always ask the most important ones up first, so that this way you'll get responses to the things that you most care about. Within those questions as well, along the lines of avoiding a laundry list, is make sure that you communicate why you're asking these questions. You know, what are you thinking about, and kind of why that's important for you as you put together your bid solicitation response. A lot of times, even though the program manager, again in some cases, and definitely the COTR or COR, has made themselves available, they don't want to have their time wasted. So when you're talking to them, you want to kind of get down to business, talk about things that are valuable to them, and then get your questions answered, and then tell them why why you're interfacing with them. This will kind of make them feel comfortable that you're not just calling to network with a government representative. All right, let's move on to the next slide, and this is basically kind of the don'ts. We just covered the do's, if you will. These are the don'ts, traps to avoid. A lot of clients that I've helped in the past have fallen victim to a couple of fallacies. And the first one is essentially what I alluded to before, is trying to bite off too much of the hard problem. So you're going to want to be much more strategic, much more targeted, and in fact, say so explicitly in your proposal that you plan to hit a particular leg or a particular segment, if you will, of the hard problem, and be transparent to say that you are not trying to solve the entire problem space that the government has laid out. In fact, most times you'll see that in a ARPA type solicitation, the hard problem is quite broad, and that's done that way on purpose. A lot of times in order to give the government flexibility. But at the same time, it's also a test as well that when you respond, if you're trying to respond to all of the components of the hard problem, they'll know that you're not being realistic. Unless it's a unless it's a 5 or 6 year full program and your firm is fairly large and you have stated up front that you're planning to look ahead and propose capabilities that you have beyond the first initial year, that you're actually proposing for all 5 years, all 6 years up front. Again, that's a little bit dangerous. It's something that you're going to want to fit to the specifics of your firm, but I would certainly focus on the basics of what needs to be done in the seed year. That's the very first year, because that's the year usually after that the government will make a down selection decision. So a lot of times in an ARPA project, they will cut you if you can't meet certain metrics or deliverables. And the reason why most firms who actually get awards don't make it pass down selection is not a competency issue, but is usually because they've bitten off too much of the hard problem space. Secondly, you don't want to let the budget scare you. So if the numbers look pretty high when you're figuring out your budget, the things that you need, don't worry. As long as you can justify that you need to have those expenses, then you should be just fine. A lot of times folks feel that the government will be scared away by the dollar number. And true, source electors do look at the number, and sometimes people can be narrow-minded. But the good news with this is that the IARPAs usually have a larger budget. As an example, you might have seen a press release that was done last week about a $1.5 billion initiative effort for electronic resurgence that DARPA put out. This is huge. This is probably one of the largest ERIs, electronic resurgence initiatives that they've done. They do this annually every year. There's usually a summit in July, and they put out kind of a large challenge, a bucket of money for a challenge for various different companies to put in. And the $1.5 billion is huge. This is really reflective of the Trump administration's focusing of resources in the military agency. So even though there's been a little bit of a proposal for cutbacks in the STEM area, really military STEM has not really been affected. The other piece why it hasn't been affected is ARPAs usually move on 2-year money, not 1-year money, and that gives a little bit more protection to these ARPAs. So usually when you're reading in the news cutbacks in STEM and R&D, don't be concerned. These are usually for the 1-year funded agencies. So those are the more tactical type of STEM projects, not basic research or long-term applied research like we're talking about here with the ARPAs. So in terms of budget, just go ahead and go with the flow with the numbers and put out a number that, as long as you can justify it with a small margin, and as long as you perhaps go to a costing analyst or costing consultant as part of putting together your proposal, run that by the costing proposal consultant to get a sanity check, again, you should be fine with the budget. The other trap that you're going to want to avoid is not being distracted by what other bidders may be doing. And it's very easy to say, ignore the competition. But here is the comforting news that I want to provide you, is that unlike a standard contract where everybody is using the same technical or execution approach to get the deliverable, here within basic and applied science, everyone is supposed to be coming to the table with a different innovative approach. So by nature, everyone is going to be doing something different. Unlikely they're going to be using your same approach, hence why I mentioned before that you'll be working on the executive summary regarding the balance of proprietary information and kind of, what is too much between proprietary information and the value of your solution. So I wouldn't worry about other bidders. You should just only focus on your own capabilities, and within addressing other bidders, you just want to say that your approach provides more value, okay, maybe more results, more accuracy, a better test and evaluation capability than other bidders. So not mentioning any firm or any other approach specifically, but just saying how you believe that you can outperform other alternatives the government will evaluate within the pile of submissions. The other traps that you're going to want to avoid is your own track record. So bragging too much about your past participation in ARPA work or other STEM work is something that I would frown upon. What you're going to want to not necessarily drop the names of various different agencies or projects that you've been a part of, more so focus on the kinds of work that you've done and whether they are applicable to the technical domain that is being focused on by this particular solicitation that you're responding. So you are bragging about your capabilities, but you're not doing so of saying that you worked on a $5 billion contract that dealt with this technical area before. Rather, you're focusing on, yes, I've done stem cell research, I have done, biometrics, mapping before, and large organizations have trusted our firm to actually execute on these projects in the past. So it's more from a technical argument than it is from a marketing argument. And then finally, you want to make sure that you don't get discouraged. A lot of times you'll put in for one as the very first time, and then you'll get feedback that says that you've really fallen down here and there, and a lot of folks take it hard. I would say that this happens to a lot of different bidders to the ARPAs. A lot of times to IARPA, they're very tough standard, and then next would definitely be DARPA. BARDA, is a little bit more forgiving only because it's a smaller, more narrower space, only healthcare as opposed to the other STEM disciplines. But I would say overall is that they all have a very tough standard. If you get rejected, try it again. I would say that 2 or 3 initial failures, yes, you'll provide sunk costs into different proposals you're putting together for those agencies, but it's worth it. It's worth it to keep having the face time in front of the program manager, in front of the different contracting officers, and they'll see that effort, that you're coming back, knocking on the door again and again, and they'll keep that in mind, if you will, by the time they get to your next proposal, because they'll see that you're factoring all the feedback that they're giving in the feedback call. They usually do a feedback call for all of the non-awards, and if you're taking that advice into hand for the next proposal, you should be just fine. All right, let's move on to kind of our final leg of our program and our time here together today before I give you some overall tips. But one of the most important things that you'll want to do as a tool for yourself is to put together what I call the 10 by 10 matrix. I would have actually given you a sample of this matrix, but I'm so bad at graphics with PowerPoint that I just decided to put it out into bullets. But if you can imagine in front of you a table that runs, along the horizontal, you'll have this first slide, these 10 different factors, and then the next slide, when we get there, they'll run vertically down, top to bottom in descending order. Why are these categories important? Well, let me go through them one by one for you very, very quickly. So in our horizontal categories, which I call content drivers, the first thing is science versus engineering. So there's a big difference. Science and engineers have a lot of overlap, but in the engineering area, again, much more tactical. Taking existing science, there's not really too much experimentation, and just executing that science into some kind of manifested deliverable, whether that be creating a software application or actually structuring out a demonstration, an experiment that could be demonstrated for the government. In the science area, what you're doing is chartering new territory. You're kind of coming up with new rules, new theorems. You're basing it on existing science, but you're hoping to discover a new observation of some kind. So you still might be having a deliverable that will end up being a software application or a demonstration, but at the end, the deliverable is going to be showcasing something new that'll add to the contribution of those scientific theorems. So the idea is you're using existing theorems, but you're trying to create a new one to add to that collection, as opposed to just creating the deliverable for its own sake. Secondly, we want to focus on experimental design. That's how well your experiment is actually structured. Do you have a control? Do you have a variable? Are you able to test with the appropriate kinds of metrics? Are you able to produce a replicatable result? Can someone else come in and do test and evaluation that can validate your results? Next, you want to come up with clear metrics. So don't do too many. Do 2 or 3 stating that these are the metrics for success. If it's an experiment that has to produce so many, whatever the units might be, joules or any kind of unit or measure, you want to have a standard and then basically state that how your experiment is coming up with a result that exceeds or falls under that standard. Sometimes if you're actually not meeting your own standards, that's okay too, because your scientific experiment is actually proving what not to do and telling the government in this applied research, we've actually proved different approaches of how not to solve the problem. As opposite as that might actually sound, it's something that the government does look for, and it's something that you shouldn't shy away from. Your test and evaluation process, so similar to your experimental design, that's basically your test, that's your business process. How are you actually managing the people, the human resources? How is the experiment moving from person to person? So it's the efficiency of how the work tasks are being done more so than the work tasks themselves. That's what the test and evaluation plan is for. Concept maps. So these concept maps are things that are dealing more, again, with the science, the individual components to the experiment, the different phases of the experiment, the protocols and the exercises, if you will, within the experiment itself. So you're going to want to map these out visually if you can, because usually a visual diagram is going to be much more valuable than any kind of verbiage, and have these documented. So if you can promise to the government that you can actually produce these kind of idea maps while you're executing, during the award, this is most likely going to give them confidence that that you know how to communicate what you're actually doing in real time. And again, that's something that is very, very rare among the bids that they see. So that's going to help you win the award for sure. The promise of conceptual maps. The nature of the data, that's just basically, how is the data structured? Is it easily accessible? Is it available? How much is it going to cost for you to procure it? Is it going to be data that's going to involve human testing, and then therefore there are internal review board or IRB type issues? So you're going to want to make sure you've got a clear understanding of the data and be able to communicate that in the proposal, that you've understood the risks and the opportunities of getting the data that you plan to review. Like I mentioned, IRB, so we'll go ahead and skip that. The business teaming aspect, so remember that unlike other contracts where you might feel obligated to only perform on this award all by yourself, you should actually reach out for other partners, big or small, and whether they be equal partners to your effort or subcontractors. But you should look to team up with other areas, because most likely when you hit, even if you're only going to hit that one little small segment of the hard problem, you're going to find that there are a lot of sub-disciplines that your firm most likely isn't going to be able to take on by itself. So you're going to have to find other experts in the field, and that might mean sharing some of the revenue from the award. But certainly it's all about getting the award, because if you're only going to be one-dimensional, you may not actually get the award. We talked about intellectual property. The only last thing I'll mention here for this slide is publishing, and that's to make sure that you represent what your position is on publishing your results, if that's what you want to do in trade magazines and academic journals, and articulate to the government those intentions, so that this way you don't get rejected based upon that. You might have a good approach that the government likes, but they might be restrictive of what you say, and so it might come down to a publishing intent to decide whether you get awarded or not. All right, well, we're running out of time, so I'm going to quickly just go through the verticals here on the matrix, and these are basically your messaging drivers. So we talked about the message. These are the things you're going to want to consider when you're putting together that message. The first is the Heilmeyer questions. This was founded by George Heilmeyer when he was at DARPA. He has it's a catechism which allows you to provide a framework for articulating clearly what you plan to do. So what is new about your research? How does it compare with the state of the art? Are you able to effectively, get the resources that you need? Do they actually exist, or are they out there in fantasy world, right? So it provides a little bit of an analytical test to help you determine if your project is even feasible, and then again, communicate that to the government. Second is the budget methodology. We talked a little bit about budget, but in terms of methodology, just how do you actually want to price it out? By unit, by hour? Is there going to be a formula that you're going to put out there? And you're going to want to make sure that it's clear how that methodology is put together, how you're actually progressing through it. Again, we talked about track records, so you're going to want to weigh those issues. The time frame, about whether, again, your firm has enough resources to do a one-year project, or if you are going to pursue one of the more longer programs like a 4 or 5 year effort. Then you want to look at the reincorporating of the deliverables. So what I mean by reincorporating is, do you plan to use the deliverables again to resell, whether it be commercially or to another government agency? If it's to another government agency, you're going to want to talk to the COTR about a thing called government use rights. And, usually they'll ask for that you cannot charge another government agency under Uncle Sam for work that they have already paid for in terms of creating the deliverables the first time. So you're going to want to be sure to ask about government use rights. The opportunity cost, whether working on this ARPA project is going to be worthwhile, giving up business that you might have, again, other government agencies or commercially already in your portfolio. So just deciding where you want to put the experts on your team to, whether this effort is worthwhile. Then also the down selection risk I mentioned before too, to look into the future. You know, you don't want to be too risk averse, but you do want to think, you know, how high is the probability that I might be down selected? And if I don't make it to a second year, is that a make or break in terms of me putting in for the award? You might just want to perform on the first year and just say, now I've got a track record working with one of the IARPAs. That's good enough for me. Or do you want to go the other route and say, no, I don't want to be down selected. I want to be alive throughout the full course of this full program, this 5 to 6 year effort, and see it all the way through. So you're going to have to, again, match that up with your goals. We talked about deliverables. You know, again, you just want to talk about the nature of your deliverables, whether they're realistic, you know, how are those deliverables different? In some cases, some ARPAs require the deliverable to be all the same, so your job might be made easy to just respond to whatever the requirements might be in the solicitation. And then finally is documentation. So, you know, you want to consider, do you have the resources in-house to document your processes, document what you're doing, document the need for program reviews that might be required by the government, you know, in a proper way, in an organized way, in a way that you might have an in-house archivist or an information specialist that's able to find that information quickly as well. So it's one thing to develop the documentation that's good, high quality, but you're also going to want to have documentation that is easy to find if you need to, you know, on a quick turnaround based upon a quick request. All right, well, let me finish off here. Like I said, I think we're almost about out of time, but let me leave you with an overall 3 points, which I think is the major takeaway as you start exploring some of these opportunities with the different ARPAs. One is go about everything with having a plan. So write yourself an informal, it can be behind, on the back of a napkin or an envelope, exactly how you actually want to approach the solicitation. You know, who are the team members you want to bring in? Do you need consultants or not? Is the budget factors going to be a make or break for you? Even though, like I said before, to not let that be an overarching thing, but is that going to be a higher priority issue within all the factors that you look at? Have a plan. That plan is just for you. You're not submitting it to anybody, but you should put it on the paper, you know, and go by it as your personal constitution, if you will, for this particular effort. It's going to be worthwhile so that you can keep organized and so that you can have something that you can stick to and that you don't get mission creep, as they say. The second piece is go to the Proposer Day event. I mentioned before the networking with the COTR and the program manager. Yes, that's important, but you need to get out there and go to the official events. And the main big one is what they call either an industry day or a proposal day, Proposers Day. Proposers Day is usually for DARPA. A industry day is what they would call it for at IARPA. But essentially, you want to go and network with other firms, kind of get an idea of who may be the other bidders. You know, again, you're not comparing with the other competition, but you just want to see what ideas are they thinking of, you know, and more from an intellectual topic space than it is, like I said, scoping out your competitors. The other element is, you know, you want to see the government's oral presentation of the solicitation, because they're going to go through the different requirements, and this will be your opportunity to ask questions and actually hear the inflection in the voice of the program manager and kind of see what they're emphasizing. And then finally is don't be afraid to ask for help. So what does that mean? Maybe this is a little bit of a marketing pitch by me as a consultant, but seek out consultants where you can in a very targeted approach. You might need a subject matter expert that deals with that particular area of science, or if it's about the proposal itself, it could be, like I said, a costing analyst to help you come up with that budget. It might be a work plan specialist to design how you're actually going to structure your experiment. So ask for help. Don't feel like you have to do it all on your own. And just like with the teaming aspect, you need partners, not just for the execution of the project, but for actually putting together the proposal itself. So that's all we've got time for today. My contact information is here on this last slide. You know, feel free to go through Jennifer, but, you know, also don't hesitate to reach out for me directly, either at my phone number there, 202-421-4607, or my email address. Again, I offer free consultations all the time. So if you just want to talk about what you're looking at and what your needs might be, I'm here to provide that, because I've spent a long time being a government federal executive before, you know, before my time here, and so I can definitely understand what the issues are from within these agencies that I can pass on to you. With that in mind, let me turn everything back over to Jennifer, and I thank you all for listening and for your time today.
Great. Thanks, Jason. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. Again, Jason's contact information is there. The list of the upcoming webinars is on our schedule, but I'll run through our next 3 topics. Next Wednesday, April 25th, we are covering 7 keys to a winning cost proposal. The following Wednesday, which takes us now into May, is the Service Disabled Veteran-Owned SDVO certification. That's May 2nd. May 9th, we are covering GSA schedules. Do I qualify? Again, the full list is on our website. They're all complimentary and all recorded. Today's recording should be on our website by Friday at the latest of this week. If you have additional questions, feel free to contact us directly at 202-365-0598. Thanks again, everybody, and have a great day.